mother said no decent man would want a woman who read that much. The printer did. Harriet Coe had read 412 books by the time she was 27 years old. She knew this because she kept a list. The list was written in a small leather notebook that she carried in the pocket of her apron, and the notebook was worn soft at the corners, from years of handling, and the list inside it was written in small, precise handwriting that got smaller as the pages filled, because she had not anticipated needing so many pages when she started the list at 14, and had been unwilling to start a new notebook because the notebook was the notebook, and the list was the list, and a thing begun should be continued, and continuity mattered to Harriet Coe the way that straight fence posts mattered to ranchers. She lived in Arbor Falls, Nebraska, with her mother Clementine and her younger brother Porter, who was 22 and who had taken over the family dry goods business when their father died 3 years earlier. Harriet helped in the store. She stocked shelves and swept the floors, and kept the accounts, and dealt with the customers who came in on Saturdays from the surrounding farms. And she did all of this competently and without complaint. But the thing she cared about was the reading. The reading was the center of her life, the way the store was the center of her mother's life, and the way the farm accounts were the center of her brother's life. And the difference was that no one regarded the store or the farm accounts as a problem. Clementine Coe regarded the reading as a problem. She had regarded it as a problem since Harriet was 15 and had read straight through a Sunday dinner without looking up. She had regarded it as a problem when Harriet was 18 and had turned down Walter Eames, who was a wheat farmer and a good prospect, because Walter Eames did not read and could not discuss what Harriet had read, and the not discussing was a void that Harriet could not fill with the other things Walter offered, which were acreage and stability, and a good set of teeth, and a predictable future. She had regarded it as a problem when Harriet was 22 and had turned down Fletcher Moody, who owned the feed mill and had excellent prospects, for similar reasons. She regarded it as a problem now, at 27, when Harriet was still unmarried, and still reading, and still keeping the list in the leather notebook, and still adding to it, at a rate of approximately 1 book every 9 days. No decent man will want a woman who reads that much, Clementine said. She said it at breakfast. She said it at supper. She said it the way people say things they believe deeply and have stopped examining, as a fact of the world, like weather or gravity, something that simply is and cannot be argued with. Harriet did not argue. She had learned that arguing with her mother about the reading was like arguing with the wind about its direction, effortful and pointless. She simply read, and her mother simply disapproved, and the disapproval sat between them at every meal like a third plate that no one had ordered. The printer arrived in Arbor Falls in October. His name was Nolan Teague, and he was 31, and he had come from Philadelphia to set up a newspaper. The newspaper was called the Arbor Falls Clarion, and it would be a weekly publication covering local news, agricultural prices, territorial politics, weather reports, and whatever else Nolan could fit into 4 pages of typeset print. He had a press, a heavy Washington hand press, cast iron, that he had shipped by rail from Omaha at considerable expense. And he had a small shop on 2nd Street, where the press sat in the front room like a mechanical altar, all iron and leverage, and the particular beauty that machines possess when they are built to do one thing well. Harriet saw the press on the first day. She walked past the shop and the door was open, and the press was visible, and she stopped in the street the way a person stops when they see something that speaks to a part of them that does not often get spoken to. She had never seen a printing press. She had read about them. She had read about Gutenberg and Caxton and Benjamin Franklin and the crucial role of the printed word in the formation of democratic thought, and she had understood these things intellectually. But the press was not intellectual. It was physical, a machine made of iron that turned language into something you could hold, and the holding of language was the thing that Harriet Coe cared about most in the world. She went in. Nolan was assembling type. He was a lean man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles, and the distracted air of a person whose attention is divided between the task at hand and the several other tasks that are waiting for the task at hand to be finished. He looked up when she entered. pushing his spectacles higher on his nose with the back of his wrist. "Can I help you?" he said. "I would like to see the press," Harriet said. Most people who came into the shop wanted to place an advertisement or inquire about subscription rates. No one had asked to see the press. Nolan looked at her with the expression of a man who has been asked a question he was not expecting, and who is pleased by the unexpectedness. He showed her the press. He explained the mechanism, the platen, the tympan, the frisket, the bed where the type was locked into the chase, the lever that delivered the impression with a satisfying pull of the arm. He explained the inking, the impression, the way the paper received the type. Harriet listened to every word the way she read, with complete and undivided attention. The kind of attention that makes the person being listened to feel that what they are saying matters, which is a rare gift, and one that Nolan Teague had not received in a long time. "You understand this," he said. It was not a question. "I read," Harriet said. "I have read 412 books. I understand what a press does, because I understand what books do, and the press is where books begin." Nolan Teague looked at her the way a man looks at a person who has just said the thing he believes most deeply in the world, and has said it better than he has ever been able to say it himself. 412, he said. "I keep a list. I have kept it since I was 14. May I see it?" She showed him the notebook. He held it with the care of a person handling something valuable, and turned the pages slowly, and read the titles and the small notations she had made beside each one, a word or a phrase that captured what the book had meant to her, a personal index of 412 encounters with 412 minds. He turned the pages for a long time. The shop was quiet except for the sound of the pages and the street outside. "This is remarkable," he said. "My mother thinks it is a problem. Your mother is wrong." Harriet looked at him. No one had ever said that. The people of Arbor Falls had various opinions about Harriet's reading. Some thought it was eccentric. Some thought it was admirable. Some thought it was a waste of time that could be better spent learning to make preserves. But no one had ever said, plainly and without qualification, that her mother was wrong. The saying of it did something to Harriet that she felt in her chest. A loosening, a release, as if a knot she had been carrying for 13 years had been untied not by force, but by the simple statement that the knot did not need to exist. She began to come to the shop. She came every afternoon, after the store closed and the accounts were balanced, and she helped Nolan set type for the first issue of the Clarion. She learned quickly to read the type backwards, which is the way type must be read when it is set, and the reading backwards was a skill that delighted her, because it was reading made physical, reading that required the hands as well as the eyes, reading that produced something tangible at the end, a page, a column, a newspaper that would be read by other people in other kitchens on other Saturday mornings. They talked while they set type. They talked about books. They talked about the books Harriet had read and the books Nolan had read, and the books they had both read and disagreed about, and the books they had both read and agreed about, and the books that neither of them had read but wanted to. The conversations that grew between them were the longest conversations Harriet had ever had, and they were the most satisfying, not because Nolan agreed with everything she said, but because he engaged with what she said, with genuine interest and intelligence. He pushed back. He offered alternative readings. He asked questions that made her reconsider positions she had held for years. He quoted passages from memory, the way she quoted passages from memory, and the quoting was not showing off but sharing, the way two people who speak the same uncommon language share the pleasure of being understood. Clementine noticed. Clementine noticed that Harriet was spending her afternoons at the print shop, and she noticed that Harriet came home with ink on her fingers, and she noticed that Harriet's reading had not decreased, but had in fact increased, because Nolan was lending her books from his own collection, books she had not been able to find in Arbor Falls, books that arrived in parcels by mail from Philadelphia, and that Nolan set aside for Harriet before he read them himself, wrapping each one in brown paper with her name written on the outside. "The printer," Clementine said, in the tone of voice that communicated everything her words did not. The tone said that a printer was not a wheat farmer, or a merchant, or any of the things that Clementine considered respectable prospects. The tone said that a man who encouraged the reading was worse than the reading itself, because the reading, at least, might eventually be outgrown, but a man who encouraged it would make it permanent. "His name is Nolan," Harriet said. "I know his name. I also know that he is a printer who makes a printer's wage and lives above a print shop and has ink on his hands at church. I have ink on my hands at church too. That is what concerns me." Harriet did not respond. The conversation had the familiar shape of all their conversations about the reading. Clementine advancing a position, Harriet declining to defend against it, the silence between them filling with the things neither of them said and neither of them could say. The Clarion published its first issue in November. Harriet had set half the type herself. She stood in the shop in the early morning and watched Nolan pull the lever, and the press made its sound. A deep, heavy, satisfying compression, the sound of language being pressed into paper. And the first copy came off the bed, with the ink still glistening, and Nolan lifted it carefully and handed it to her. And the handing was not a formality, but a recognition, an acknowledgement that the newspaper was theirs, in the way that anything made by two people working together is theirs, belonging to neither alone. She read the first copy, standing in the shop with the ink still wet on her fingers, and a feeling in her chest she could not name. Her name was not on it. It did not need to be. The type that she had set was on every page, and the setting of it was her signature, invisible to everyone but Nolan and herself, and the invisibility did not diminish it, because the things that matter most between two people are often the things that no one else can see. In December, Nolan asked if he could walk her home. He had not asked before. Their relationship had existed entirely within the shop, within the space defined by the press and the type and the conversations about books, and the asking to walk her home was a request to expand the space, to let the thing that had grown between them in the shop exist outside the shop, in the street and the cold December air and the curious eyes of the town. They walked. The walk was only 3 blocks, and it took 45 minutes, because they stopped twice to discuss a passage from a book that Harriet had finished that morning, and because the discussing required standing still and looking at each other, and the looking at each other became something that neither of them wanted to interrupt. At her door, Nolan said, "Your mother will not approve." "No. Does that matter to you?" Harriet thought about this. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, carefully, with attention to nuance and complexity, and the several layers of meaning that any important question contains. "It matters," she said, "but it does not decide." Nolan nodded. He understood the distinction. It was the distinction between influence and authority, between caring what someone thinks and allowing what they think to determine what you do. And it was a distinction that a woman who had read 412 books and who had kept reading despite 13 years of being told that the reading was a problem, was uniquely qualified to make. He asked Clementine for permission to court Harriet. He went to the house on a cold Sunday afternoon, and he sat in the parlor, and he asked, because he was a man who believed in formalities, even when the formalities were likely to be refused, and because the asking was a form of respect, not for the answer, which he suspected would be no, but for the relationship between a mother and a daughter, which he understood was complicated and old, and not his to disregard. Clementine said no. Nolan thanked her. He stood up from the chair. He put on his hat. At the door, he turned and said, "Mrs. Coe, your daughter has read 419 books. She can set type at 30 words a minute. She understands the role of the press in democratic society better than most men I studied with at university. She is the most remarkable person I have met in 31 years of living. I am going to court her regardless, with your blessing or without it, but I wanted you to know that I asked." He left. Clementine sat in the parlor. She sat there for a long time, in the silence that follows a statement that cannot be argued with because it is true. Harriet and Nolan were married in the spring. The wedding was held in the print shop because the print shop was where they had met, and where the first conversation had happened, and where the type had been set, and where the press had made its sound. Clementine attended. She wore her Sunday dress and sat in the front row, and she did not smile, but she did not object. And the not objecting was, for Clementine Coe, an act of acceptance that cost her more than anyone in the room understood. After the ceremony, Harriet opened her notebook to the next blank line. She wrote, Book 431, The Arbor Falls Clarion, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 18. Beside it, she wrote the notation she always wrote, the word or phrase that captured what the reading had meant to her. She wrote, Home.